So the questions again are, when the clinic or doctor tells you to go and do more exercise, what comes to your mind? And when somebody mentions the term graded exercise, what does this mean to you? Okay, shall we make a start? Is that okay, Vicky?
Yeah, that's all good with me. I'll be here in the background again if you need me for anything.
Yeah, okie dokie. So Vicky, if you can sort of keep an eye on some of those comments, that would be really useful, if you possibly can. Now I'm going to try and share my screen for a bit of a PowerPoint. Let's see if this works. So can you see that okay? Can you see that okay?
Yep, that's all fine.
Yeah, great. So I've done my questions. Those of you who weren't with us last week, my name's Lorna Nicholson. I'm one of the founding members of PoTS UK, set it up as a charity. I'm still involved. I'm not a trustee anymore, but currently involved with updating some of the web pages. I work as an advanced nurse practitioner in primary care, so I work in a GP surgery and pick up quite a few people with POTS and hypermobility who have been hanging around the cardiology system and haven't really got a diagnosis. I'm also a body control Pilates teacher, so I've got 2 jobs. And I just have an interest about exercise. So these are some of the activities I do now. Yeah, so they're there. I started with POTS symptoms 13, 14 years ago, and a lot of these activities I had no chance of doing. Just walking up the road to do my shopping was a big event. So it was just too hard. It felt like up the road was like Everest, and I thought I'd never be able to walk up a hill again or ride my bike again. So I just want to share a little bit about my journey, how I've got from that point to being able to do these activities now, which I can do. So medication has made a huge difference to me. So I'm currently on diltiazem, which lowers my heart rate, and sertraline, and the combination seems to have worked really well. So from getting to a point of really struggling, I've managed to very slowly over a number of years gradually increase my exercise tolerance. I'm never going to be a marathon runner, but I don't particularly want to be. So it's fine. I can do as much as I want to do. So as well as the medication, there was lifestyle changes, as in I changed my job. So I used to work in A&E. So you had shift work, high pressure, working lots of hours or full time. So I now work part time. I'm in my GP surgery. I work, don't do many hours a week. I sleep. I have a regular sleep pattern. So I'm not doing shift work anymore. Less stress. So all of these factors come together, which makes a difference. And I do think over the years, even though I'm still on medication, your body adapts to that medication and a slightly inappropriate heart rate. So the first question I asked you is, what comes to mind when you get told go and exercise? Vicky, are you in a place to read some of them out?
Yes, I'll just bring the chat up. I've already seen a few. The one that stuck out to me the most was if a consultant told me that, I would freak out thinking it was a full-on cardio workout.
Yeah, exactly. Any other sort of types of comments?
We have graded exercise slowly improves activity.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a lot of comments, quite a lot of long comments. Exercise is also scary for me because I've been a lot worse for the past 2 years since I pushed myself super hard and did running for a year.
Yeah, yeah.
Get back to the gym. The first question, it will improve your mental health.
Okay, right.
Classes, gym, slowly increase the exercise.
Yeah.
Graded exercise to me means starting out slowly and gradually increasing.
Yeah. Just do one more on the what is exercise.
Just looking through the comments, a lot of people seem to be concerned about graded exercise. I found one here that says I would be worried, and then the next one says graded means start slow and gentle and increase from there.
Yeah, yeah.
Gentle exercise of choice, maybe dancing or the gym.
Yeah.
Somebody said that they can't seem to pace themselves.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, a variety of
that will do for the moment. We will come back to that. So exercise is kind of what comes to your mind, and I do think often you get told go and exercise, and most certainly for me what comes to my mind is right, go and ride my bike, go for a run, go to the gym. So some of the things you were saying, so we're talking cardiovascular exercise. But what happens is you try and do these activities and you wear yourself out. You kind of have this boom and bust cycle. You push yourself and then you feel exhausted, and you just can't, you just feel so bad. You just think, oh, exercise, I'm not going to do that. Almost certainly that's what it felt like to me. And because my heart rate was not controlled initially for the first few years, you just don't have the capacity to do it. I will say I have PoTS. I do not have joint hypermobility, and I don't have the additional health conditions that can be associated with it. So I'm a bit more straightforward. When you've got like gastroparesis and your hypermobile joints, it adds a further factor into ability to exercise. So my challenge is we need to think a little bit differently about, well, what do we mean by exercise? So I think a bit more in terms of increasing physical activity. So I had a look for a definition for exercise, which is activity that requires physical effort carried out to sustain or improve health and fitness. So just to break it down a little bit, I found this quite helpful. So you can break down fitness into physical fitness. So there we've got the cardiovascular, that's there, but that's only one part of it. We've got endurance, we've got strength, so you could do some weights, speed of movement, so moving your limbs in a different rate of movement, fast or slow. We've also got range of movement, which is your flexibility, so joint range of movement. So if you're hypermobile, it's often about controlling range of movement. If you're not hypermobile, it's often about maximizing range of movement. So you've got all these components which all make up physical fitness. And then we've got the neuromuscular fitness, so sort of muscle-brain connection. So coordination, reaction time, so if somebody throws you a ball, can you catch it? Agility, linking everything together, balance. So when you think of what exercise is, all of this comes together to improve physical fitness, which can come under the umbrella of exercise. So it's a kind of a broader area to think about than often what comes into our mind. So just a little bit about what the literature says. There's not a huge amount in the literature about exercise and PoTS. There is bits and pieces, but it's still limited. Massive area of research this could be. So there's Fu et al., which is part of Dr. Levine and the Levine protocol. They're thinking it's all about deconditioning. which is about being out of shape. It might come as a result of you have an injury, which results in you potentially having a length of time in bed or not moving very much. So your muscles get a bit floppy, your ability to balance gets a bit out of sync. And as a result of that, kind of leads to a downward spiral of PoTS. So that's where Levine and co come from. But the reality is, and PoTS UK did a survey a few years ago, which showed that 66% of the people we surveyed were actively engaged in some sort of physical activity at the time their PoTS symptoms started, which kind of throws out this deconditioning theory. It is there, and I have met people who are really honest and say, yeah, I broke my back, I was on my back, bedridden for a period of time, and that's when the PoTS symptoms started, and I have got deconditioned. So it happens. But there's a lot of people where the deconditioning comes as a result of the symptoms. So you start with the symptoms, and then because you can't exercise, then you become deconditioned. And then the more deconditioned you get, the harder it is to get yourself back into that place where you want to be. But one of the positive things about Fu et al. And Levine, they do suggest starting with recumbent lying down exercise to begin with, which sounds quite a sensible starting point. So Sheldon, in one of their papers, says that patients should engage in regular, structured, graduated and supervised exercise program featuring aerobic reconditioning with some resistance training for the thighs. So all these words get thrown out there, and I kind of think, what are they really trying to say here? And sometimes I'm not quite sure. Satish Raj, again, so working on aerobic exercise, leg resistance work, avoiding upright exercise, focusing on activities using like a row machine where you're sitting down, swimming, and recumbent biking gets mentioned quite a lot. There's also another study which was linked with Nick Gall in King's about dysfunctional breathing with people with PoTS. But basically it was found that people with PoTS tend to breathe more shallow. So they send people to a respiratory physio to work on breathing. So it's a different form of exercise, but it's all related. If your breathing isn't as efficient as we would like it to be, then if we can improve that, that was going to help you with the exercise, with generally exercising. And I think of breathing because of the Pilates, and breathing is part of what we teach when we teach Pilates. And then Jane Simmons, who spoke a few weeks ago, she did a study looking at exercise beliefs and barriers amongst her patients with hypermobility. So it's focused on hypermobility. She got over 900 responses. And when she asked her patients what exercise or activities have helped you most, swimming was number one, walking was number two, Pilates was number three. So that was quite an interesting finding, which is worth thinking about. I don't know how many of those people had PoTS. I think it was a small number with PoTS, but the majority were hypermobile. So what have we learned from the literature? Basically, the research is quite poor. Talked a lot about aerobic exercise, which is basically any exercise which makes you a bit out of puff. So for me, walking up the stairs, I still get out of puff. So basically, whatever movement you do is aerobic to a certain extent. So it's using oxygen rather than using some of the other energy systems. So adding some resistance work to the legs, starting horizontal and thinking about breathing. So all of that makes sense. but there's just not much evidence out there. So adding resistance, we're thinking about using things like a TheraBand just to increase the work on the muscles of the legs. And I'd say that any muscle work is really beneficial. So the whole trunk, your whole core, legs, thighs, whole body work, which is why I'm a bit of a Pilates fan. So in PoTS UK, a while ago, we did a little study looking at barriers to exercise. And this was some of the results, which I always find quite interesting. So biggest cause is too tired, which I completely understand. When you've got to just do life, that's enough to then add in some other activity. And people feel unwell while they're trying to do some activity, or the after effects can be pretty bad as well. Feeling faint either before or after. Fear of injury is a big one. Fainting, and sadly no time. I would say somewhere in your time scale that you need to create a bit of time to do something. So the graded exercise. Vicky, are there any specific things that come up with graded exercise? I did see somebody thinks mentioned CFSME, which, yes.
That's right, yeah. Somebody mentioned that they have both PoTS and chronic fatigue syndrome, and yeah, the advice for that is kind of counteracts each other.
Yeah. Any others?
Nothing specific at the moment. We've had a few comments about actually exercising, but nothing specific at the moment. That was the main one that I saw.
Yeah, great. Well, one thing I will say is once we've done the talking bit, we'll come on to some questions. There's a little question and answer box. Feel free to write in questions as you go along, and then at the end I'll go through some of them. So graded exercise. It's this term that just gets bandied around, and it kind of bothers me a bit, because it's like, what does it mean? And you're right, a lot of people associate it with chronic fatigue, the PACE study, graded exercise. I can't do any exercise, it's harmful for me. And understanding a bit of the history about that can be quite useful. So my top colourful diagram there is what the actual graded exercise, when that term is used, graded exercise therapy, is a step-up approach, but it's in that format. So day 1 you do level blue, day 2 you do level green, day 3 you do level orange, day 4 you do level red. And each time you increase your intensity level of activity. The problem with that, it doesn't work because it doesn't take into account the variability of symptoms. And so I always, whenever people say graded exercise, you just think, what are you actually trying to say here? It's not quite this step-up approach in this way. So underneath I've drawn my wiggly line, which is what I would say is more like the reality of somebody with PoTS, almost certainly for me over the last so many years. But you have good days and bad days. Some days you seem to be able to do more, some days less. Some days you just hit rock bottom and you just think, I can't do a thing, which is fine. But for me, the curve over many years, there has been a gradual improvement, gradual increase in exercise tolerance, but we're talking years down the way. So this is, graded exercise doesn't take into account the variability of symptoms and the fluctuation of symptoms. Oh, there's a hand raised. Oh, does that mean you have something to say? Put in a question or a comment. So pacing, somebody mentioned about pacing. This is a biggie. You've got to have the energy, enough energy to do any sort of activity. So I always think of the spoons theory. You need to find the spoons to do a bit of activity. One of the problems is if you have to work full time, you've got a family, you're looking after your home, that probably uses all your spoons. And so it's really hard to carve out the time to add in a bit of activity. But somehow, if you can, it will make a difference. So this is just taken from the PoTS UK website. If you have a limited amount of energy, so you need to budget and work out how you're going to spend it. If you're on an overdraft, you'll have to pay some back. If you use more than what you have, you'll become overdrawn. And getting the pacing right will make a huge difference in terms of being able to increase your activity. So that's kind of the starting point, is kind of work on the pacing in everyday life and then gradually incorporate some activity into it. So it's making sure you have, you plan in an activity, and it does depend on what you're going to do. So for me, something that's more cardiovascular uses a lot more energy. So most certainly in the early days, something like riding a bike, I knew it's going to be a big spoon spender. So yes, I might do my bike ride, but I have to be prepared that there will be consequences for it. And often the consequences, the fatigue would hit 2 to 3 days after. So it's not necessarily at the time. Normally at the time I'm a bit buzzy. 2 to 3 days later, fatigue. But then you recover from that. But I wouldn't go for another bike ride. So it might be once a week or once every 2 weeks, I could take that. I could do other activities in between. So I could do something like Pilates, which is more focusing on your muscle strength and muscle endurance, and working on joint flexibility. So it's looking at the different types of activity that maybe you can incorporate. So on a low spoon day, there might be something you can do, but it's not a cardiovascular thing. And when you've got more spoons, then doing something cardiovascular every now and then is not a bad thing to do. So that's just a bit about pacing. A lot more we could say. Nutrition. This is another one of my bugs. Something I think a lot about, and it would be interesting to know your thoughts on this. Often the guidance for people with PoTS, and I know a lot of people find it beneficial to be on a low carbohydrate diet. In the exercise world, carbohydrates are the biggest source of energy. So if you're too low on your carbohydrates, I often question, where are you going to get your energy from to do any sort of exercise? Now there are those who say, yes, you can get your energy from your fats and your proteins. Most people in the exercise world are very wary of that. So it's just something for you to think about. If you're on a low carb diet, are you getting enough energy to then increase your activity? So I put this picture of, it's kind of trail mix. So often when I go for a bike ride or something, I'm going to be out for a long time, I'll in the morning make sure I have something decent, something like porridge, plenty of carbohydrates, but slow burn carbohydrates with some nuts and seeds. Then when I'm out and about, I don't want to eat too much. If I eat my breakfast and then go straight out the door, my body is still trying to digest that food. And yeah, it just doesn't work very well. So giving it a bit of time, then going out. And then while I'm out and about, this is the sort of thing I might eat: some dried fruit, nuts, seeds, cereal bar. So just thinking about what are you eating if you're going to do some activity, and just make sure you have some carbohydrate-based snacks. They don't need to be, I mean, I like my licorice all sorts. I can do a few mountains on licorice all sorts. I know there's a lot of refined sugar in that, and a lot of people don't find that useful, but it's finding other sources of more natural sugars that are still carbohydrate that could help. And salt and fluid is a biggie. And making sure you are well hydrated before you go and do something, and remain hydrated throughout. When the weather starts to get warmer, I will make sure if I go on my bike, I'll take water with either sports drink, or I kind of make my own with water, lemon juice, salt, maple syrup or honey, and take that. So I've got something with some carbohydrate and some salt and plenty of fluid. And I do find that makes a huge difference. And also salty snacks like peanuts can be really useful. Just make sure you keep the salt and the fluid intake good. Yep. And also thinking of what you do afterwards. In the sports exercise world, they talk about having something with protein and carbohydrates, so a milkshake. So that's a really, really good bit of protein. You've got some liquid, bit of carbohydrate, can help in terms of recovery. So after exercise. So as I said before, the fatigue might hit 2 or 3 days later. And an element of muscle aching is normal. And that's okay, especially if you haven't done any activity for a while and you start to do some activity, and that aching can come on 24, 48 hours later, and muscle fatigue. So it's normal. And often people get a bit concerned that they ache after. Whereas, yeah, a certain amount of feeling like you've done a bit of work is not a bad thing. And again, what I was saying about pacing, just need to think about how you're spending your spoons. So just a few of my key tips and 1 or 2 other things. So have low expectations in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So if you were like me and want to ride your bike, don't expect yourself to be able to jump on your bike and go like you used to be able to. You have to start off really slowly and just gradually build up. So slow down and don't push it. Again, I know for myself, you see a hill and you just want to motor up the hill, but then you sort of crash and burn at the top. My trick is just slow down. Slow right down to a talking pace, and have a conversation with somebody. Efficient breathing can really help. And if I come to a stop, well, one of the questions I got before I emailed in question, somebody mentioned they seem to do better if they keep moving, which is very true. So if I'm on my bike and I'm coming to a stop, I will find a place, a curb or a rock or something where I can stay sitting on my bike and just put my foot on it, so I don't actually have to stand up and stand still. If I'm out walking, I would sit down on the ground or on a log or find a bench, rather than just stop and stand still. So absolutely try to not stand still, especially when you've been exercising. Then I most certainly can feel my blood pressure starts to go a bit funny and I feel a bit lightheaded. But I can minimize that by not standing still. So try and do a little something every day. So the cardiovascular is one tiny bit of it, but also think about the other components. So a bit of balance work, a bit of resistance work, a bit of working on physical fitness, neuromuscular fitness, just a little bit of something, and try and incorporate activity in your everyday life. So it might be taking the stairs instead of taking a lift, even though you might be out of puff. So just try where you might be walking to the shops instead of driving to the shops. don't worry about the speed of activity. So something like walking or biking, I don't think we're ever going to be speed walkers. I most certainly cannot do anything at a high pace. So just accept that and try not to push yourself. So on a bad day, just accept it's not going to happen. And that's fine. Well, often if I'm, certainly in the early days when I'd get back out on the hills walking, I would have plan A, I'd have plan B and plan C. And it's very hard to know how you actually feel until you get going. So your mind might be saying, right, I'm going to do this, that, and the other. Your body might be feeling like, oh, I just can't face it today. So I often think, right, well, let's just go anyway, because sometimes when I get going, I'm like, oh yeah, I perk up and I'm not too bad. So start off with plan A, but if you get going and you think, oh, it's really not happening today, then just accept you might need to do plan B, and that's okay. So always have a bailout option. And a lot of people, they have their plan and they want to stick to their plan and push themselves through, rather than just trying to listen to your body. And I've been thinking a lot about that. How do you know how much is too much? And I don't really have an answer. It's quite a difficult one. It's something you need to work out with time for yourself, what is too much for you personally. And so if you have a day where it's just not happening, just accept that, it's fine. The next day you might find you're in a different place and you can do a lot more. Somebody asked a question about exercising with heart-lowering medication, which is a really good question. To start increasing your activity levels, having your heart rate controlled will make a huge difference. So if your heart rate is out of control, so most certainly when I first started with the symptoms, my resting heart rate was over 100. So walking up the road, it was just sky high. So the fatigue that came with that was just unreal. So it was only when the heart rate was managed to a certain extent that I could then start increasing my activity. But the downside with the heart-lowering drugs is they kind of do put a block. So I do find that I don't think my heart rate will go up. So if you are pedaling really hard up a hill, you need a heart rate of 160, 170. That is normal. But for me, I don't think my heart rate would go that high. So just be aware of that. So any sort of high intensity activity, I just can't seem to do. That's gone. So I'm not going to be a sprinter, but that's fine. I don't want to be. So anything high intensity. And if I'm cycling and there's a section that is more high intensity, I break it down into sections. So I stop and rest. So I'll start off pedaling and I kind of get to a point where I feel, I can't even explain how I feel. It just feels like, okay, if I keep pushing myself, I'm going to feel really sick and pretty rubbish. I need to stop. So I just stop, stay on my bike, rest my foot down somewhere, wait for my heart rate to come down a bit, wait for my breathing rate to slow down, have a rest. It might only, I call them micro rests. So it might only be for 30 seconds and then do the next section. And I might have to have, if I'm riding up a hill, I might need to have a number of these stops until I get to the top. So it's really breaking it down into realistic chunks with what you can achieve. We have a number of different energy systems. So I do feel with me over time, the energy systems to get the right amount of oxygen to the muscles has improved and developed and adapted to cope with my heart rate lowering drugs. And a lot of the advice is start off horizontal, which makes a lot of sense. But ultimately, you don't want to stay there. So some like the balance work ideally should be done standing on your feet, and being upright is kind of what we need to do for everyday life. So yes, you can, with the horizontal stuff, you can push your heart rate, and if you can push your heart rate without the symptoms, starting horizontal is great, but then gradually changing that to more upright exercise would be useful, but combine it. And I personally don't worry about my heart rate. Some people are very keen on monitoring heart rates. I don't, because I don't think numbers can help you. I very much go on symptoms. How do I feel? What's my fatigue levels? Do I feel sick or dizzy? So this is just a little something that really helped me in the early days. This is from a sports psychologist talking about how to restart increasing my activity levels again. So breaking down an activity. So with this one, I've taken cycling, and you could do this for any activity. So it's breaking it down into intensity of the activity and duration of the activity. So 1-on-1 is very low intensity, low mileage. So I've picked 5 miles on the flat. Now for you, that might be a few meters on the flat, but that's fine. That's a starting point. Everyone's starting point is going to be different. And then increasing, if you do okay with 5 miles on the flat, you might think, oh, I think let's try a bit of a hill with that. So I'll do 5 miles on the flat with a bit of ascent. So this is kind of a graded approach, but it's not a step-by-step approach. So you might have a day where you think, okay, I could really go for it. I think I'll do my 25 miles, but it's going to be a flat ride. But the next day you think, I'm too fatigued today. Actually, I'm just going to do a low intensity walk for half a mile. So that might give you a bit of a structure with how you can pick an activity, whatever it is you might like to do, whether it's walking, biking, swimming, anything really, and just break it down into intensity or duration. Now, you can use time, you can use other factors in there as well, and just break it down into really low level and just work out for you what would be the next step and what would be the next step. And then you have to judge it day by day. Right, let me stop sharing. So that was most of what I had to say. There's 1 or 2 questions that got sent to me beforehand, so I'll just go through some of them. So is swimming okay to do with PoTS? Brilliant. Can't go wrong with swimming. And one of the there's a few advantages with swimming. It's horizontal. It will work your heart rate, it works your muscle system. And you've got, with the water, you've got a bit of compression. So that can also help. So lots of people do find it useful. So for some people coming out of the pool, it's often a really warm environment, can be an issue. So just coming out, sitting on the edge of the pool for a time, cooling down, before you then get up and go and get changed, can be useful to manage that. Yep, so I've talked about the standing still. If you keep walking, you're less likely to get symptoms, so avoid standing still in one place. How do you know when your body needs to stop due to your PoTS symptoms? Struggle to pinpoint that. I'd be interested to hear from you. Please, can you repeat the swimming information? So swimming's good. You get an element of compression from the water. Exercises the heart, exercises the muscles, but when you come out, just be careful. You might need to sit by the edge of the pool for a time before you then go and get changed. So how do you know when your body needs to stop because of PoTS symptoms? Difficult to answer. It's quite individual. I know I just feel a bit sick, feel lightheaded. Just It's a sense of my body saying, right, you need to stop now. So managing the transition between supine, recumbent exercises and upright. So it is recumbent, and then like my little grading system, you might think, okay, I'm going to try and do a bit of a walk, but let's make that walk a few meters and leave it at that, and then gradually increase that. Yep, agree with swimming. Yep. And how do you know when you're ready to transition? Another good question. So again, you have to just try, but pick your activity. So if you're going from, say, recumbent biking and you're doing okay with that, then try something with low intensity. What about going redwood swimming? You probably would go redwood swimming because it's a hot environment, your blood vessels will dilate. Is upright exercise an achievable goal for all PoTS patients? That's a very good question. It's very individual. It depends on your motivation, how well your heart rate's controlled. If there is elements of deconditioning going on, you need to work on the muscle reconditioning first. So something like Pilates to just strengthen muscles to then enable you to do upright exercise. Whether it's achievable for everybody, I don't know. Good question. So we've talked about the heart rate. Connection keeps on breaking up. Is this webinar being recorded? Yeah. Yeah, I think it is being recorded. Yeah, so I don't use heart rate monitors. And another question about the buildup of lactic acid. Yes, there will be, any exercise, you will have a buildup of lactic acid. It's much worse for people with PoTS because the oxygen, because of the heart rate not being as well controlled, getting the oxygen to the muscles, that it just doesn't, it's just not quite normal. So yes, lactic acid seriously does build up, and that's probably one of my biggest stoppers, just muscle fatigue. And the only way around it is to stop and have rest and go back to it a few days later. But with time, the endurance has improved. And I think some of that is my body working out different ways of making energy, utilizing the different energy systems, working on all components of fitness. Let's have a look at some of these other questions. So someone says, I'm hypertensive, controlled by meds, and have atrial fibrillation. I also show signs of PoTS. Can I have all of them in the same mix? Good question, not directly exercise related. If you've got all those other issues going on, it would be very difficult to say yes or no to PoTS. You would have to chat with your cardiologist. What is respiratory training? I think it just means teaching good breathing patterns. So deep thoracic breathing, so allowing your rib cage to widen, so you're maximizing your oxygen input into your lungs. So if you breathe really shallow, so you hyperventilate, you're not going to maximize oxygen exchange, get into your blood and into your muscles. So if you can breathe efficiently, so you have training in your breathing, so as we teach in Pilates, then that might help. I'd love to know if you know any good exercises for upper back and shoulder pain. Have a look at my Pilates workout on body control Pilates. I do some work on upper back and shoulder and postures. Or find yourself a good Pilates teacher near where you live. Your set of physical activities such an eye-opener, as I've realised how far I've come over the 2 years, rather than I can't yet walk around the garden. Thank you. I'd love to contact a respiratory physio. I didn't know they existed. I know in King's in London, they are referring people to respiratory physios. I don't know about anywhere else around the country, but I would say from a Pilates point of view, I could probably teach you the same things. And it is quite straightforward, just thinking differently about your breathing. So somebody has asthma, so they're not going out at the moment, which is completely understandable. What exercises would you recommend to do at home to get some of the same benefits related to PoTS? Swimming, walking around without overdoing it. Swimming and walking without overdoing it. So definitely Pilates. And then it depends on how you are with upright activity. So not so easy to do. Some people, not necessarily PoTS people, have got themselves like a turbo trainer, so they can do some cardiovascular exercises on a bike. You can get little hand wheel things and little pedal bike things, which would just help with the cardiovascular exercise at this time. So Dr. Wolf sent me the Philadelphia exercise program. I assume that means the Levine protocol on a month 3 and struggling maximum steady state. Also missing not getting to my local leisure centre to do the strength exercises on seated equipment. I presently feel deflated as I don't have the energy to keep going with the program, and my injuries have flared up, i.e. rotator cuff, tennis elbow, back pain, hip flexor pain. Yeah. This is one of the problems with following a kind of set exercise program like that. If you are, say, doing the strengthening exercises or the mobility exercises, and you're not doing them correctly, using the correct muscles, which is one of the benefits of Pilates. When I watch people really carefully, I can see if they're doing it correctly. And if it's not being done correctly, then other things will flare up. So the cardiovascular bit is not so bad in terms of going wrong with it, but the musculoskeletal type of strengthening work, endurance work, most certainly, especially if you've had a period of time where you haven't been as active and then you increase the activity again, the muscles need retraining how to work properly and how to walk properly and using the right muscles in the right order. So without that really specific support, I'm not surprised things start to flare up. But things can be done to help with that as well. What if you are trying to lose weight with regard to carbohydrates? I have weight loss surgery and have been told to go on high protein, lots of veg. Have EDS, CFS and PoTS. What should I eat? Thanks, as I don't want to get fat again. Good question. A dietitian would be somebody to help you with that. So it's not impossible in terms of exercise to go on a high protein and high fat diet, but I'm not sure. A dietitian would need to advise you on that one. But it is, what sort of cardiovascular exercise are you doing? Is the temperature of a swimming pool bad for PoTS? I love swimming, but find I go quite red hot. So it's not bad, you just have to manage it. So making sure you drink plenty before you go swimming, and take in plenty of salt before you go. Accept it's a hot environment. That might make symptoms worse. As I said, just as you get out, you might need to sit by the side of the pool, have a drink handy, have a drink, sit, cool down, have a cold shower, something before you just get out of the pool. You said no to standing still after exercise. So do you mean sit down or keep limbs moving? It could be either. It depends on what you're doing. Yeah. So I personally tend to sit down but that's what I choose to do. But you could easily, if you come to a stop, do some of the Pilates exercises I was talking about, so heel raises, squats. But it just depends on the context. So yeah, it's keeping the muscles working. What advice should we give a not very knowledgeable physiotherapist who just thinks you are making a fuss? Nervous. I don't know much about PoTS, EDS and CFS. Direct them to the PoTS UK website, and hopefully they will be able to help you with that. Do you do private Pilates? Yes. Make contact with me through PoTS UK. They can pass on anybody who's interested. Maybe have another webinar that includes breathing. Oh, okay. That will be for you, Vicky, to think about. Jane did a bit on breathing. There's not a huge amount to it. And I might be able to do a little video. I've got a little YouTube channel. I might be able to do a little video on breathing and just put it on there and put it on the PoTS UK website. So leave that with me, and rather than doing a whole webinar on breathing, because I don't think it warrants a whole webinar, but I can do it. I can do a little YouTube thing if that would help you. Dear. Oops. Oh dear. Breathing would be great, thanks. Have we got to the end of the questions? I think we might have.
Yep, I think that's all of them, Lorna.
Yeah.
With regards to the breathing webinar, I agree that I think it would be too short a webinar to do just on one subject. So if you were able to maybe record a video on that, and we could upload that to our website and YouTube channel, and then we'd be able to share it from there. Yeah.
Yes, leave it with me. I've got some other little videos to do, so I'll see what I can do. But that would make sense.
Yeah, we'll have a discussion about that, no problem.
Yeah. Could you do a webinar for people that have just been diagnosed? Please, would you do another webinar? Breathing would be great. Jennifer, you say, please, would you do another webinar? Do you have anything specific that you want a webinar on? I think the PoTS UK team have other ideas. Not just physical activity, but there's so much, like you've newly been diagnosed with PoTS, what do you do? There's so many other webinars that could be done. Do you know how feel good? Do you now feel good when exercising, as I feel great when supine strength training and swimming, but really struggle walking for more than 5 minutes? Yeah, don't think I can answer that one. I think that's it. If anybody wants to ask me a question or contact me, just go through the trustee at PoTS UK email address, and Joe or Vicky, whoever looks at that, can forward any emails direct to me. Is that okay?
That's perfect. Yeah, thank you again so much, Lorna, for everything you've done for us today.
No problem.
And yeah, I'm sure you'll be joining us for another webinar at some point down the line. We'll make some inquiries about that as to what we can do. But there are a lot of other webinars that have been lined up at the moment on different topics. And if you follow the Facebook page, they'll all be posted on there. So thank you very much for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you in our next webinar.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye, Lorna. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.